Much like the many retellings of Greek mythology, Hades is an experience that changes each time you go through it, which makes it fairly easy to lose count of how many times the hourglass has flipped since you began playing. This is something that was true even during its initial month of early access, and is when I poured the bulk of my time into the game. And now that the sands of time has finally taken us past the official release of Hades 2, I can officially say I think this game is fantastic.
Past, present, future.
Behold.
Now for the stipulations. I don't think everyone will find a similar 100 hours of enjoyment as I did within Hades. Not that finding 100 hours of enjoyment is a requirement for a game to be good, but it's still something worth discussing. Because I was probably 60 hours past completing just about everything that maybe a more normal person would want to achieve. Although again, that was during early access, and maybe now it's a bit easier to approach that without torturing yourself. Either way, I've been thinking a lot about what exactly drew me to playing Hades 2 to this degree of excess. Like most games that tickle my brain, it often comes down to the interactions you are allowed, and Hades is no different. Except when trudging through the underworld, the interactions go far beyond the standard. It still holds the typical interactions you're likely to see in an action roguelike, whether it's between you and the characters, the weapons you've chosen, the attacks you perform, the arcana you flip, or the boon you're granted. But Hades then takes these a step further and creates interactions that happen between all of these individual interactions and sings them in unison. And with the roguelike nature of Hades, you'll be unlikely to hear this same exact song ever again. Nearly every individual interaction has its importance in the chord, but far and away the most important ones, or those that I find make the game most fun, are the interactions between weapons and boons. Together, these are the root of the chord, the foundation of the House of Hades. The interactions between these two could alone keep most engaged for the entirety of the game, so let's explore these a bit more in depth. Boons in Hades 2 are the powers given to you from the gods in order to help you achieve Melinoe's goal of death to Kronos. Each god has their own set of appropriately themed upgrades. For example, Zeus will offer a myriad of lightning abilities, such as causing chain lightning to emit from each of your attacks. Or maybe you'll come across the lovely Aphrodite, whose theme involves increasing your damage based upon how close you are to the enemy. Each and every power you gain through these boons tend to interact with your base abilities in somewhat similar ways, but they are significantly different enough on their own to change how you will play the game. For example, Demeter might offer a boon that makes it so your cast freezes enemies when they touch the circle. Or you might see Zeus, who can make it so this cast instead rains lightning bolts down on a single opponent within the circle. Both of these are strong effects, but it's easy to see that the best way to use each of them is quite different and will ultimately change how you play. For example, I might use the cast much more aggressively when I have the Demeter boon because it will stun enemies for about 3 seconds, allowing Melinoe to wail on them until they become active again or perish. But with the Zeus boon, the lightning strikes only a single enemy at a time, so I'll be a lot less confident diving into a group of enemies and instead use it more defensively or try to place it on a priority target. It's important to note that your control over which boons you get is fairly limited each run, so even though you may find yourself in a similar arena with a similar set of enemies, you'll have a totally different set of powers to deal with it, meaning almost every run will change how you might approach the same room, and the constant stream of new boons will add in more and more interactions, likely further changing the most effective way to play even within the same run. To see this in action, let's examine what it might look like when we continue adding more and more interactions to our cast. Let's say we clear a room and get offered a boon from Apollo, who can grant the ability to create waves of light that damage our enemies when using the cast. Next we might get a boon from Chaos or Arachne that increases our cast damage or maybe the Omega charge speed, which would then make it likely that the cast is now your best offensive tool, meaning you'll even prioritize it over your weapon attacks, something somewhat rare within a run. But then these interactions can be built up even further. You'll eventually discover different aspects of your weapon that interact with your cast in fun new ways, such as the aspect of Circe on the staff that causes your pet to also lay down a cast and create a laser beam between the two of you, or one of my favorites, the aspect of Charon, which adds a very strong interaction to your cast. If the circle is struck with a blast wave from the Axis special, it causes the effects of the cast to occur, boons and all. The ultimate build here is probably getting as much charge speed as possible with a mana boon and something that lets you throw your cast from afar. The most important part probably being the charge speed, since the axe special is typically long enough to finish reading the Odyssey before it's done winding up. Anyways, being able to spam this powerful ability on whatever poor souls end up in your cast with both the axe special and the cast damage raining down on them at the same time is incredibly strong and fun. This is what makes Hades 2 so good. It's these interactions that get layered and layered until the way you play the game is almost unrecognizable from the start or even any other run. It's why I put over 100 hours into the game during its initial month, and why I couldn't wait to play it again when it fully released not long ago.
We all should get what we deserve. No more, no less.
The gameplay of Hades is great, and the story, characters, and dialogue follow a similar formula with their interactions as the gameplay, meaning the actions and events Melinoë goes through each run will change how characters react to her afterwards, creating a seemingly unending constant stream of new dialogue that's related to what you just did. Even during early access, I never stopped getting new dialogue after all the time I had poured into the game. This enhances the experience in ways that would be tough to not notice. Even little things like Hecate saying,
"Not even a scratch,"
after you reach her at the end of Erebus without losing any hit points, or Kronos saying,
I struck, not even once.
if you take no damage from him during a fight. There are so many of these interactions that it wouldn't surprise me if there were still some secret ones that have yet to be discovered. This again all stems from the entirety of the design of Hades being based in the interactions, but I think at some point Supergiant may have began to overvalue these dialogue interactions a little more than they should have, especially the earlier ones. So much so that they desperately wanted players to fail their initial runs, so they almost guarantee that they will see the dialogue that comes with a loss. And so enters Strife incarnate, Eris.
Trouble? Hello, Eris.
If you perform well enough in any of your first 10 runs, this little harbinger of mischief will show up and give you an aggravating debuff, one that makes you take 20% more damage right away and then increases it by 5% for each encounter you do afterwards, meaning just after 16 encounters you'll be taking double damage from every enemy attack, making it all the more likely that Kronos and his minions will send you back to your tent in the crossroads. I think there is a staggeringly large consensus among players that this mechanic stinks. Its stench is potent and lingers for far too long. Despite that, Supergiant was aware of how disliked this mechanic is, yet they've stubbornly left it in the game. So you might be wondering, if the mechanic is that despised, why keep it? As far as I'm aware, the reasoning they've retained this mechanic that has persisted since early access is to be sure that first-time players fail and see the dialogue that comes along with that failure. Supergiant wants you to lose, especially after reaching a new area. That, and they wanted to give Eris an entrance into the story that makes sense with her character. But taking this extra damage feels so bad during these early runs when you're going for your first win. And even worse, I think it makes you believe you could have prevailed when in reality 99% of players were probably going to get hit at least twice as much before dying anyways. Especially if they make it to Kronos early on, he's not an easy encounter. Even worse, if they wanted to make it more likely that players would lose their first 10 runs, I think this could have been easily accomplished in a different way that didn't feel so bad. Something like Eris taking all of your gold at a shop rather than Charon being there could have been a suitable option. Like maybe she forces you to trade all of your gold for meta progression resources such as Ashes, Psyche, or Bones. Not only would this feel less detrimental to your run, even though it probably is more detrimental, it also could have been a great opportunity to add a decent story interaction that includes Charon, as well as create a good excuse to add another incantation, maybe one that keeps Eris away from the area. It could have been something as simple as needing one of each resource from that area to make Charon appear there for the first time and ridding Eris of her presence. This would simply sweeten the deal with another story interaction that would perfectly fit into the design space of Hades. Not getting a shop and having all your gold taken away from you would still probably feel a little bad, but it wouldn't feel nearly as horrible as the increased damage, mostly because new players won't understand the power of shops yet. So ultimately I think it would have been a far more interesting solution to implement. It makes sense with the story, it achieves Supergiant's goals with dialogue interactions, and it doesn't make the player feel the false hope during their initial failed runs. In fact, I have a feeling players would have actually liked this, as it would be more like gaining power rather than losing it. It's a win-win-win solution that I'm surprised Supergiant didn't implement themselves.
Just remember that I'm doing this for your own good. And actually, mine too.
While there is a lot of power in shops, it's not nearly as much as there is to be gained in your first 10 runs of gathering upgrade materials. With the amount of buffs you can get through the meta progression systems, your 11th run is going to feel drastically easier in contrast to your first. You'll be far stronger than you were before even stepping foot into the forests of Erebus. Whether it's getting a new weapon, upgrading your Arcana cards, getting a new keepsake, casting incantations from Hecate's Cauldron, Eris getting bored, or simply getting good. Far and away the most powerful of these progression systems are hidden behind flipping more Arcana cards. These give you an enormous amount of strength, whether it's reviving from death, increasing your speed, HP and mana, or just raw damage. These are unlocked by using the Ash and Psyche resources that can be gathered throughout your runs. Ashes will unlock more cards to choose from, and Psyche will allow you to increase your grasp and equip more cards at a time. During early access, I somehow completely missed the tutorial for increasing my grasp. This pretty significantly increased how long it took me to get my first Chrono skill. So my first 15 runs or so were probably a bit more of a challenge than Supergiant intended. So honestly, if they had really wanted to nerf good players early, they should have just not given the tutorial on how to use Arcana and Grasp until you had a bad loss. But anyways, since then they've tweaked this a bit and made it a little more clear as to how your Grasp gets upgraded, although I still think it could be a little better. The Arcana itself is a fairly interesting system with a staggering amount of different combinations. I find it to be one of the best of these pseudo-talent trees I've ever seen, as a lot of the power across the board feels very appropriately priced, with tons of viable options. And best of all, choosing your Arcana doesn't come down to looking up a guide and clicking the most optimal build, but rather choosing powers that will best facilitate your playstyle. Outside of this system, there is Hecate's Cauldron, which is how you'll be spending the other plants and rocks you've been foraging throughout your runs. The power you can gain here are typically pretty small and almost more akin to being quality of life updates, like adding a fountain to the rest spots found at the midpoint of each region, restoring potentially lost health. But you'll also use the Cauldron to do things like progress the story, unlock new powers, pets, and bring some renovations to the crossroads. Finally, there are also these little keychains that are gifted to you after the first time you offer any character a bottle of nectar, the most similar of these being a keepsake from each god that will cause them to be very likely to show up during a run, letting you tailor your boons a little. Other keepsakes vary wildly. My favorite is the White Antler. It sets your max HP to 30 but increases your crit chance up to 30%, which is insanely strong because crits deal 200% extra damage in Hades. But of course, because of the diminished HP you get, it's very high risk, although if you can kill the enemy before they even have a chance to cause you damage, where's the risk? During early access, this could last your entire run, but Supergiant appropriately nerfed this keepsake to only last a single region, meaning it's typically only taken during the final leg of your journey. Others still remain very strong, like Skelly has one that will give you an extra Death Defiance, meaning you can die in extra time. Moros will make you essentially invulnerable for 10 seconds instead of dying, and if you clear the encounter within those 10 seconds, you revive instead. And one that is great to eventually combo with the White Antler, since you can eventually change keepsakes during a run, is Arachnes, which will give you initial armor and then armor per encounter cleared, giving you a ton of effective HP and making things like equipping the White Antler a much more viable option in the late game. After 15 or 20 runs of unlocking all this power, you'll likely start finding it tough to lose a run. There's so much power to gain that it feels like nearly any combination of weapons, boons, arcana, or whatever else will make you strong enough to win every single time. And if you can win under pretty much any condition, doesn't that make the game a bit too boring? This problem of the game is quickly alleviated with the introduction to the Vows of Night. Similar to Heat in the original Hades, this allows you to incrementally increase the difficulty with a large variety of sliders. Here you'll find the usual suspects, such as increasing enemy health, damage, and speed, but then some more interesting modifiers like adding a time limit, adding shields, tougher bosses, or making shops more expensive are here. Combining many of these will make conquering the underworld a much tougher feat and keep the game engaging for much longer. And on top of that, completing these challenges also offer great rewards, the best of which are probably these statues, but most valuable are these nightmare resources that allow you to upgrade the aspects of each weapon. These of course give you the feeling of accomplishment, but also more dialogue, better boss fights, and more power to play with. This feedback loop of getting more rewards and then increasing the difficulty again is extremely well designed and can keep even the best players engaged with the systems for a long time. And for players who don't wish to seek out such challenges, there is also eventually a totally new area for you to conquer. So this just isn't a sequel, but with the inclusion of the surface, this is Hades 2 and 3 all within a single package, with 4 more regions to conquer after the underworld and of course 4 new bosses. Speaking of bosses, these are the highlights of the game, where you can use all the power you've accumulated until this point to overcome these challenging obstacles. I think for the most part, these have excellent design and feel fair to fight while remaining challenging to do. That is, until you learn to fight or the game well enough that it almost doesn't even matter how many times you get hit, or start challenging the Vow of Night versions of these bosses, which are much tougher. All that said, overall, I'm not a big fan of how Supergiant has designed most boss attacks to be avoided. It feels fairly predictive and knowledge-based, which isn't a playstyle that I particularly love. To be clear here, I don't think it is in any way bad, it's simply just not to my liking. I just tend to prefer action games that are more reactive rather than knowing when to dodge. Because in something like Hades, the situation is typically that when you don't know the boss attacks well enough and you know they are near unreactable, the best option is to just run away from them, meaning you're engaging with the boss less, and for me, that's a much less fun way to play. That said, the knowledge-based fighting of Hades can still be fun, even for me, and again, I just think it feels worse overall to play and learn for me personally than something more reactive. It's a topic I might consider discussing in more detail in the future, but for now, I think I'll leave it at that. In the end, Hades 2 is certainly one of the most exceptional games released in the past few years, and is a must-play for anyone who loves action games, roguelikes, or both. It's an experience that almost never disappoints, with a near limitless amount of possibilities in how you can both approach and play the game, leaving the potential for every run to turn into something special. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.